We're going to now work for our canvas game with the little Flappy Bird. We're going to work on adding some gravity to the game. To do that, we're going to add another property to the component, which is has gravity. So here, with the list of items that I need to provide when instantiating a component, I'm going to add has gravity as well. And I'm going to need to make sure that I update all of the instantiations to include the value of that property. So maybe here under the type, I can introduce a new property, this dot has gravity, and I'm going to assign to it the has gravity variable provided when I instantiate the component. Then I'm going to introduce another property, which is a gravity value. So that can be happening right here. If we have a component that has gravity, then in that case, we're going to define what the gravity value is going to be. So we're going to define it as a property, this.gravity, and then we're going to set 0.05 for now. We can increase that or decrease it depending on the need. And then we could have an else statement, although that's not really necessary. But just to be thorough, if it doesn't have gravity, then we can define that gravity property to be 0. And then one more property that we're going to associate with the component is the gravity speed. And we'll see how we're going to use that in a little bit. But initially, it's going to be set to 0. We're going to modify its value with the move function. So if you remember a little further down below in the definition of the component, we had defined the move function that was using the horizontal and the vertical speed. And then they had also some functionality for our background. We're going to remove the y speed here because that's going to be changing due to the gravity. And we're going to have a little if statement here. If we think about all of the components that we instantiate, none of them are moving vertically, all moving horizontally, whether it's the background or the obstacles. So that's how we can get away with doing this, getting rid of the this.speedy line of code. We're going to check if the component has gravity. And if that's the case, then we're going to interfere with the y coordinates. So we're going to change the gravity speed as we move along. And using the gravity force that we defined, this.gravity, each object could have, or each component that has gravity could have a different gravity. So that way you can simulate different weights type things. So now that I have my gravity speed calculated, I'm going to use this.y and then increment that by the speed y that we had before, and then also the gravity speed. And I'm going to also check that I'm not leaving the bottom area. We could also create a function similar for the top and the left and the right, but let's just focus on the bottom. So I'm going to define a hit bottom function. I haven't defined that just yet, but I'm going to do it very soon. We do need to keep the information for the background here in that move function, and maybe once that move function is defined here, which it begins right here. I can't find the matching curly brace with the move function. I don't know why Visual Studio is not helping me out with this. I think the matching one is right here, because that's where I have my crash with function. And I'm going to define the hit bottom function that I mentioned earlier. So this one is just to avoid having our bird in our example go through the bottom of the screen. So we're going to define a variable that we're going to call rock bottom, which is the bottom of the screen. So for that, we're going to use the game area.canvas.height. But we don't want the bird to move out of the zone, so we're going to also take out this dot height, so it looks like the bottom of the image for our bird is resting on the bottom of the canvas, which kind of makes sense. And then we're going to check the coordinate of the y coordinate of the birdie or the component, and if that is greater than the rock bottom, that means my object is trying to leave the screen through the bottom of the screen. So in that case, I can set that this dot y to be equal to the rock bottom. So now we have to, since we modified a little bit our component, particularly with this property has gravity, we're going to have to check whenever we have instantiated a component to add a true or false whether the component has gravity or not. So I'm going and looking for, pressing Control F, I can search for stuff. So component is what I need to look for. And I can see some of those here. There are the main ones. I also have the obstacles. So after the type, I need to add whether it has gravity or not. So the birdie does have gravity. I don't really need to change this one because it's a comment. The score text, that does not need to have gravity, so I can set that to false. I also have the background here, and I can set that to false. I don't need to have gravity on the background. Let's find out the next one. There they are. So I have the type, and then those obstacles will not have gravity, so I make sure that I add the false, sorry, to all of those. I can check if I have figured out all the components. This is the definition, and then I get back to the start there. So let's try and save our script and see what happens when we run this. I have my browser started here. I'm going to refresh. And my bird has gravity, that's great, but I can't come up anymore. I can't fight that gravity. So I'm going to need to come up with a solution there. And I'm going to pause the game so we don't hear the music going on. Maybe I'll put a breakpoint. So our next mission is going to be to try to find a way to modify a little bit the motion of our object in the way that our birdie is flying right now, where we're having the gravity take over and we can no longer come off the ground. So we're going to use an acceleration to kind of fix that issue. I'm going to add maybe after the update. There goes, I have to move down, move left, and maybe before I define the component right here, I'm going to define a special function for my my bird. I'm going to call it accelerate. And then here it's going to expect a numerical value when I call it. And the whole purpose here is to change the gravity of the bird and set that to the value that's provided. In my HTML document, I'm going to go and head back to it. We had defined a bunch of buttons. We're going to get rid of those for now. I'm going to comment them out. Now we're going to add an accelerate button. Not sure why Visual Studio is not helping me, but it's okay. So for the button, we're going to use the on mouse down event. And then when that happens, we're going to call our accelerate function. And then since when we're clicking, we want the bird to go up, we're going to provide a negative value there so that our bird goes up. And the other event is going to be on mouse up. And in that case, I'm going to call the accelerate function. But in that case, I reestablish the regular gravity by making my birdie going down. And then therefore sending a positive value to the accelerate function. All right, let's save this and give it a try. Let's refresh the page. So the gravity, there goes my function accelerate. Now it's kind of a little sensitive, so we want to make sure that we're accelerating but not too much. There goes the collision. If I refresh the page, I'm going to let it fall through. It still stops the bird. But I hit the bottom, kind of like what was scheduled before. So that's kind of what I wanted to show you with the gravity. You could also determine some bouncing. If you check the Word document, there's some of that information for including a little bit of a bounce. It's just a matter of adding another property and then modifying the gravity speed with that bounce. I'm not going to cover this in this video. It's enough for now. And I'll see you in the next one in just a little bit to talk about rotating objects with Canvas.